Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. I'm here today with Ari Moshe Wolfe, and we are discussing Chiron in Cancer, or the fourth house. We are moving through a series looking at Chiron through the houses and signs. Look at this beautiful image. Love that. And we've made it all the way to the fourth house, Cancer archetype, ruled by the moon. And if you've missed the first three in the series, we do have them available on YouTube, so check those out. If you know where your Chiron placement is, and it's in Cancer or the fourth house, you will definitely find this these teachings today are very valuable. And so I'm so excited to welcome Ari Moshe back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you. Good to be here. I just noticed that that woman has your hair color and my curls.
I have a lot of wave now, I think, post-children, that pregnancy. I used to have stick straight hair, but...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I love this picture for Cancer. It's so perfect.
I love it.
It's so good. And you've got some planets in that fourth house. I have a Cancer rising, so I'm just, I can feel it. I can feel the Cancer energy. I love it. So it's obviously part of the water trinity that we talk about so much in evolutionary astrology, and how important it is to get into the water, to get into the river, to get into the emotional body in order to evolve. That anytime you try to enter in another way or another means, you will hit a roadblock. This is the only way in and through. So we have reached the door, the door into the emotional body and the wound that sits there for those of you that have the signature. Mm-hmm. Now, before we dive into Cancer in the fourth house, Ari, if you would, as I've asked you in other shows, it always comes out differently and organically, of course, is discussing the energy of Chiron, the archetype, why we are spending a whole year talking about it. And it has become pretty popular. People are always talking about their Chiron now, I think, because it was designated, what, a dwarf planet or...
Comet? Oh, is it? Is it no longer a comet?
I think a dwarf planet, wasn't it?
Oh,
designated that, or I don't know. It was increased in its standing, or what have you. It's I think it was given another a higher kind of place in the galaxy, but of recognition. But anyway, it definitely is a symbol that's talked about quite a bit, even in, I would say, even with my clients that don't know a lot about astrology, they seem to know a decent amount about Chiron, because everybody can relate to feeling wounded. And so we all have our wounds, affecting us in different ways, or they're rooted within us, within the signature, as well as shown how it's very fresh. I would say that Chiron placement feels very fresh, very recent, and is so much a part of the whole paradigm that we look at. It's adding further detail to the paradigm, the Pluto paradigm. But I've used that word to describe Chiron, not Ari, but today I am, and it feels very Cancerian to say that.
Totally.
It feels like a fresh wound. It feels like an old wound at the same time. But if we don't deal with our wounds, if we don't really get inside the center of them, even if they're ancient and old, seeing the polarity in Capricorn here, even if they're ancient and old, they can feel so fresh and tender still if we don't take the time to heal whatever is causing us pain. Yeah. And so that's why we're discussing Chiron, so we can get in the river together.
Yeah.
And talk about it.
Yeah, the language is so Cancer today. And I really do often feel such a natural resonance between Chiron and Cancer. My first solid teacher in the evolutionary astrology path was Adam Gainsbourg. And he actually, not like as an official theory, but he sort of postulated a natural connection between the moon and Chiron, not going in that direction necessarily in terms of octaves or whatever. I do feel there's a deep inherent lunar quality to the Chiron archetype. Just to think of the idea of having a wound, like a wound is different than a scar. Like, as you were saying, it's old, but it's also recent because it's fresh. If you touch a wound in this moment, it will hurt. It can relate to something that happened a while ago, a past experience that created the wound. But wounds are sensitive. That's what they're like. And when we speak of sensitivity, we're also really touching base with the emotional body, our vulnerability. So Chiron at its core speaks to this really special divine vulnerability. And I say the word divine to really emphasize this piece that it's a part of the program, that the phenomena of vulnerability is actually inherent to this incarnational experience. And so recognizing it, having the experience of it, is more about realizing this path of intimacy with ourselves, this path of greater embrace of our vulnerability, of our delicateness, of where we feel broken in some core way. That journey of embracing ourselves is a part of it. And that's one of the beautiful things about Chiron, in the sense that it really takes this infinite soul consciousness manifesting in human form, and it turns awareness towards itself in a way where it's not about transcending, like I am not this body, I am not this wound, I'm not this circumstances, nor is it about becoming totally identified with, there's a problem and I'm going to have to fix it. It's something that takes us entirely beyond that into a very intimate personal realm of direct experience with our own self. And so Chiron at the core represents where we have a medicine, something that we all carry inside of ourselves. And only by coming into ourselves, meeting our pain, meeting our feeling of brokenness, which means also meeting our individuation, where we are different, where we stand apart from the crowd, where there's a condition unique to us. And Chiron will often represent physical, mental, emotional, circumstantial impairments, so to speak, that really do set us aside. They are unique conditions that make us who we are. It's turning to it and realizing, okay, this is my reality and I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to continue to move forward in life, continue to show up, to follow my soul path with this condition. And the combination of showing up and embracing ourselves as we are brings a great humility. It's sobering. And there's a unique medicine that comes forth. If the one-armed archer decided, I can't teach archery because I have one arm, then they wouldn't develop the techniques and the skill and the wisdom and the understanding that they would otherwise develop in being a one-armed archery teacher. And you take Cancer as you take Chiron in any sign and house, any aspect, you look into where is that unique wound, where is that unique vulnerability, and we say, embrace that. Don't try to fix it. Don't run away from it. Accommodate to it. Become intimate with it. Embrace it as your reality. And you'll find that your wound isn't a wound. It creates a reality for you that allows for a unique quality of medicine that would otherwise not exist had you not been, quote unquote, wounded. But it really reshapes our relationship to pain, our relationship to healing, because it becomes really more about the journey of embracing our whole self and showing up in that. And I tell you, every time I show up to do one of these, especially these talks, there's like an increasingly, I'm experiencing Chiron in my own life the more I mature on my path, as it doesn't really matter what we think about ourselves, what our opinion is, how equipped or unequipped we are. Like there can be with Chiron a whole bunch of self-image issues. And that's especially potent in the fourth house. But if you just show up authentically as yourself, there's no hoopla about it. There's no big deal, really. But there's a unique medicine that comes forth with it. So I really think Chiron is like often like this torturous energy. We move through it, and then we're just ourselves. And something really beautiful can come through that.
Yeah, I wanted to share. I mean, you use this word to describe it, the medicine. It's where the medicine sits or lives, and it's about going into that wound to recover the medicine. And I realize we're talking about the fourth house in Cancer, but your Chiron in Taurus, right, in the ninth, your medicine is music. It's the thing that, while it makes you vulnerable to express the music inside of you, because you're sharing a really sacred part of you, and there's a humility that comes with it. If people are going to judge how you sound or what you're saying or how you look, naturally that's what you do when you put yourself out there in that way. But it's the music that's the balm for your soul. It's the healing quality. It's the thing that will allow that to allow what is open to heal, right? Open, and when I think of that open, I mean wounded. And it made me to think about something you shared in terms of not being a scar. It's something that's open, it's fresh, it's something it's sensitive to touch, it's sensitive when you think about it, but it is all about feeling. And I remember Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, wrote a chapter called Battle Wounds, or maybe it's Battle Scars, one or the other. But there's a quote in there I'll never forget. And she says, just like with changes of the weather, when you have an injury, the wound will ache again. This is very cardinal, right? You think you've moved through something, and then you hear a song or the weather changes and it brings back a memory, and you're reminded of how painful a piece of your past might have been. That's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of experience as you get back into the wound or into the water. And she reminds you in those pages but it's important to remember that in tensile strength, the scar is tougher than skin. And so when you think of the polarity from Cancer to Capricorn in this context, at some point that wound will heal and there will be a scar. And she's just sharing that you will be stronger for it, for being in that vulnerable pocket in time, for being able to have the courage to stay in the center of something and to return to it until it is fully healed. We never forget perhaps the memories of the past. We're not meant to. They're all held in the cells of our being. It's just our orientation to what we do with the wound or what happened that's important. That's how we know we've evolved. When we can return back to that time or back to that feeling or back to that memory, and it just doesn't create the same kind of raw, kind of, I would say, weeping feeling. Like when a wound weeps or seeps, whatever those terms, I can't remember exactly the word. Is it a weeping wound? But that's a good measure to return back to a time when something occurred in your life that created some kind of trauma. When the weather changes, are you evolving through it? Are you continuing to repress it so you don't have to deal with it? So inside the Chiron archetype, inside the center of that archetype, for you in Taurus, it's the medicine is the music. And it's many other things, I'm sure. But with Chiron in Cancer, it is about getting into this body of water that you see here in the image. It is taking off everything, all your clothes, so to speak, everything that you're hiding from or that you're trying to protect yourself from, becoming totally naked and vulnerable and getting into this water of emotion. Like this water is like tears.
Mm.
tears and all the emotion just pouring out of you,
Mm.
just sitting in it, staying in it. And ultimately knowing that is where your greatest strength will emerge.
Mm. Beautiful. Good. I was thinking you were going to talk about my Chiron moon opposition, so I'm glad you didn't go there.
Well,
So let's
we
jump.
can talk about that when we get to Scorpio.
Yeah, right. So,
Wait, I want to say one more thing before we
yes,
go on. Adam Gainsbourg,
yeah,
there's something that he said in a lecture of some sort. I can't remember the title of it, but along the same lines that you were sharing, which connects very much to the water trinity. And again, something I've never forgotten. Anytime like reading a passage in Women Who Run with the Wolves, or when an astrologer or an author says something that creates an emotion in me, a feeling in me, these are the things that are like tattoos in my soul. You know, and he said this, he said, the only heart you can trust is an open, broken heart. Something along those lines.
yeah,
Because you think about Cancer to Scorpios, this part of the grand trine, you know, with Pisces, is that it requires absolute vulnerability to be in a relationship with somebody. If you want to go to the depths, you know, to the center of what is possible between you and another, in order to open then those gates that connect you to something larger. You cannot hold anything back. And the only way to do that is to be vulnerable. And if you've had your heart broken, you know what it's like to be vulnerable. And if you show somebody that vulnerability, saying, I know what it feels like to be there, to go there, that person will be able to trust you with their own broken heart if both of you are showing each other that wound, that vulnerable space. And I thought, wow, that was just something I felt like was so true, as opposed to somebody who has never had their heart broken, or you know, because they always want to be the leaver, right, the one who leaves, you know, is obviously not the kind of person you're going to naturally trust.
mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, Chiron in Cancer, the fourth house, as an archetype, is known to retreat back into the shell, right? There's a fear around being vulnerable.
Yeah,
They are vulnerable. They've been wounded when they were vulnerable, but there's also this protective shell that they carry with them. And so it is, and to evolve that energy is about getting into the center of what you are afraid of.
Mm.
What's the worst that could happen if you show somebody your underbelly, essentially, right? What's the worst thing that can happen?
One of the things that happens in Cancer is that there's a need for safety. There's a need for a sense of, okay, I can be loved here. I can belong here. I can be accepted here. And so like a baby doesn't have any sense of like, is it safe to cry? Like there's an inherent need for us, especially when we're young, to feel completely acceptable and safe, to have our emotional reactions in life. And then that can mature in a healthy way. But if there isn't safety for that, it creates an immense displacement of our basic core emotional body, which shapes our identity. So with Chiron in the fourth, there can also be this issue of not being able to access one's own emotions. This is very often a situation where it's like, it's not just that one is afraid to be vulnerable. There's a feeling of brokenness in sense of one feels they are wounded in such a way that they can't even cry. They can't even access their vulnerability. And so what that will create is a repeated experience in life of almost like, the imagery that I have for this is a child on the street without food, without a bed, without warmth. It's like a deprivation of basic core human needs. and not even knowing how to ask for it, not even knowing how to get it, not even knowing how to access this place that has been deeply, deeply hurt and wounded. That's very often one expression of that. Something that happens in the Cancer.
Yes. Oh, and in addition, I would say, while they don't know how to access that, they know that they have no other choice but to figure out how to do it, because they're
Yes.
so on their own. I don't know how to get what I need, but I know that I am all I have, and I have no other
Yeah.
choice but to figure out how to nurture myself, how to take care of myself, how to complete myself within myself, how to lean on myself.
Yeah.
So there's this feeling of always being alone
Yes.
and not emotionally nurtured or cared for in the way that they inwardly know that they need naturally.
And the kicker here is like not even knowing how to nurture oneself. It's like that right there can be the pivot point for self-nurturing. It's actually realizing the agony and the pain of not being at home, of not feeling safe, of not being cared for. I so often see with Chiron in the fourth house that there's often this like ongoing denial of one's deep permeating sense of brokenness. I mean, think of anything in the fourth house as the core of our identity. It's our foundation. So to have Chiron there, that means we really have to come to terms with our own vulnerability. And doing that is not easy. So it's very often to live in this denial and not wanting to face a deep sense of brokenness within oneself. And yeah, it's about really accepting that we are alone. What we learn in the fourth house is self-intimacy. Yes, it's about the reality of nurturing, care, and family, and safety and trust. But the core of it is our relationship to our emotional body. Do we know how to self-care? Do we know how to give ourselves what we need to nourish and nurture and to come home? Privacy, the womb, care, safety, self-care, the right kind of food that will nourish us. Cancer also corresponds to anything that holds, anything that contains. Right? It's like our bed it's our womb, it holds us. Our house is a container. The womb itself, the nature of the feminine itself, the earth itself, from this point of view, also corresponds to Cancer fourth house. I had this one friend with Chiron, Chiron and Taurus in the fourth house, and it forms a yod to Pluto in the ninth and Neptune in the 11th. And she shared that she's had a past life memory of coming from, I think it was the Pleiades, and her Chiron's also right on the Pleiades, so it might have been the Pleiades, but I'm not sure. Coming from somewhere far away, not here, a long time ago, and coming to this earth for various reasons, to evolve her own soul, to evolve humanity, and at some point forgetting the spiritual truths, the ways of giving and inclusion, and being at home in her own soul. She forgot these truths and became corrupted by the ways of society and got lost and got confused for several lifetimes. And now in this lifetime, she's coming to terms with a deep sense of, I don't feel like I belong anywhere. Ninth house, Pluto, 11th house, Neptune, that Chiron and Taurus in the fourth. It's all about finding stability in her own inner being. And for her, this has so much to do with realizing that what it's like for her to be alive, a human being on this earth, on this planet. It means facing the wound, the collective suffering of how we've distanced ourselves from our earth mother, how we've distanced ourselves from the body, how we've alienated ourselves from the womb, from the context of our physical human incarnation. So a big part of her journey is really getting in the body and bringing back the sacred, bringing back the care and the honor to the body, to the earth, to the feminine. So we can have a lot of souls with Chiron in the fourth house or Chiron in Cancer that are really addressing really deep wounds of how we've abandoned the feminine within and without, and thus feeling this alien relationship to it. How do I care for this part of myself that needs? What do I do with that? How do I have a relationship to that when there's no context? And also gender can be a really big deal here. We'll look at a chart in a moment that speaks to that very strongly. So you can have a soul with Chiron in the fourth house, and let's say they're manifesting in a male form, that might have a lot of resonance or relevance to their own journey with integrating the feminine in their life relative to the nature of the suppression in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I would say that could be like a soul who's kind of has this emotional arrestment.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe really strict upbringing and not a soft mother at all.
Yeah.
And not allowed to express emotion in any way. And so the emotional body can just be kind of, as you used the word, kind of denying that, but frozen or arrested at a certain age and not really knowing how to cultivate it or emotionally mature that energy because of not
Absolutely.
having an environment to support it. So again, back on your own again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the pieces with Chiron in the fourth house is that's the homeopathy of it. It's like even the not knowing how to care for yourself, or even the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of opening up. And there could also be a lot of like this deep fear of being abandoned, being betrayed, not betrayed, being abandoned, like being left alone. And that can be rooted in some really peak wounding experiences of the child or the inner child being left alone, right? Crying and not being held, not being fed appropriately. Like all these things that just create this sense of, I don't feel safe to be vulnerable. And yet that right there is your vulnerability. Like not feeling safe, be that. That can be your vulnerability. And so a lot of souls with Chiron in the fourth house have a dharma to be bringing the medicine of emotional healing to other people. And their own experiences of feeling deeply wounded and deep fear or incapability of vulnerability, if they relate to that, if they can open to that, they can bring healing to other people in their own emotions. And so it's like a lot of people might be working with women, working with babies, working with children, doing womb work, and in general, just being a midwife, so to speak, a healer that has a deep intelligence and attunement to the emotional body that allows people to be fully present and cared for just where they are. So a lot of these souls can bring forth different modalities or techniques or healing practices that come from their own intimate relationship with their vulnerability in life. Chiron in Cancer, Chiron in the fourth house is such a powerful signature. Mm-hmm. We often think of Chiron as well, as I mentioned, where there can be actual impairments. And sometimes you can see the impairments, sometimes you can't see the impairments, right? And so physical impairments can relate to any of the organs that correspond to Cancer fourth house, the breasts, the yoni, the womb space, or belly. And these impairments can also be a portal to access emotions, wounded places inside that are needing care and attention. And then these impairments, they may not be a physical thing that we can look at, that we can identify, but the whole spectrum of the human experience is so complex. There's so many facets to it. And one thing we're really just starting to get and learn in our medicine culture right now in society is that you don't need to have a physical symptom of something for there to be some kind of manifestation of disease or an impairment happening inside of you. And that so many of the impairments or the sicknesses, so to speak, that we carry inside of us aren't just a physical condition. when we speak about Cancer, we're looking at a deeply psychological component of our human experience. Like, it's totally irrational. It's not something you can like diagnose, and it's like it's in our own emotional body. And how do you locate that? How do you identify, here's an issue happening in your emotional body and here's a medicine for it, right? So like there's something about really getting connected to our own emotional reality and finding the medicine in that. It takes so much self-intimacy, so deep honor and respect to everyone with Chiron in Cancer, Chiron in the fourth house, Chiron in the moon, who is doing that work on your path in getting to know yourself. It's the most important thing.
I think of a couple of other examples with Chiron and Cancer, or Chiron in the fourth, is this client of mine who there was this fear around becoming a mother. And I don't have all the aspects in my memory right now in her chart, that it's like this fear, if I have a child, either I will die or there's some kind of loss linked with being a mother. And ultimately it was about, as soon as she had a baby, it was taken away from her. In another life. You can see the symbols there. And the south node was in the fifth, if I remember, and I think Mars was squaring the nodes. But it could have been she was too young to have it, or was with the person that the family didn't support. Any number of reasons, and really, I think the details of the story here aren't important. More so, just about finding out, figuring out what is the fear, what is the wound about, and how can you heal it. And being a mother in this life, which she did end up getting pregnant and having a child, literally dealt directly with that past life loss. A wound as a mother, because to her, being a mother equaled loss, equaled something taking away what she loved more than life itself. And a pain that no mother ever would want to have to experience, especially right out of the womb. Or I shouldn't even say especially, at any point in life, of course, but so fresh again, this Cancer word, so fresh out of the womb, and not being able to even hold the child. The emotion was just immense. And so the healing for her was to become a mother. And it absolutely dissolved so much of the fear, of course. She was able, at the Mars square, was able to access the courage that she needed to go through with it and to trust it, because she wanted it. She wanted a child. She wanted to be a mother, but her desire was equal to the fear. And so there was this dance that occurred for a while. And I do know the fear was creating a delay in even her ability to get pregnant. Because, of course, the soul coming through knows that and says, I don't want my mom to not be sure. I'm going to wait till she's sure,
Yeah.
I mean,
not all souls do it that way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That is also true. But I think in this instance, in this particular soul story, the soul that came through, I do feel was, really part of course, part of the healing, which may have been the soul that she lost in another life. It very well could have been.
Yeah.
And so, another example with Chiron and Cancer.
Beautiful. I have a dear friend with Chiron and Cancer conjunct Mars in the 10th house. And she recently gave birth to a baby. And the father of that baby was violent. And so before she gave birth, she had to separate from him. So Cancer in the 10th house, Chiron with Mars. And so it's really about her facing her own ability to be a leader of her own life. She is strong enough, even though there's vulnerability here and there's a aloneness, but she is strong enough to be a mother. And that the whole mothering journey here is a part of the medicine and the healing of her also coming into her own power and her own gift as a healer.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah. That's her playing mother and father.
Deeply, yeah. And it's opposite all this, it's opposite Capricorn in the fourth house stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it's awake. Let's look at some charts.
All
oh
right.
no, this guy. So
Oh
um,
no. Oh, dear.
it's a good example because
It is.
conjunct the North Node, it's worth mentioning. It's like, God, yeah. So Chiron and Cancer in the ninth house. Ninth house is race, ninth house is culture, ninth house corresponds to your belief system. When you look at Chiron in the ninth house, for a lot of souls, for most souls that I work with, Chiron in the ninth house can speak to, you were a part of a tribe or a culture or an indigenous community and you were persecuted. Or you spoke up for your beliefs or your truth and you were shot down, and now you don't really know if it's safe to be who you are, to be authentic, to be your own truth, to follow your religion, to be true to your culture, to your race. There can be a dynamic of alienation. Or in the case of Hitler, you can be causing and creating these wounds. So Chiron does very often correspond to where we affect wounds for other people, which of course reflects back into our own deeply internalized, unintegrated wound ourselves. So this soul, to unpack this, Chiron, and we'll get to the North Node in a moment, in Cancer in the ninth, it's ruled by the moon, which incidentally is also conjunct the South Node, in Capricorn in the third, which is conjunct Saturn. So basic synopsis here: this soul rose to power, wanted to have more authority, was put in jail. During the time he was in jail, wrote a book, Capricorn third house. Pluto with Neptune in the eighth house in Gemini. The book had an influential effect on the masses, and it led to him becoming an authority and a leader. 10th house, Saturn, Leo, dictatorial, leadership, influential with his words. Third house, Capricorn. He was able to affect an entire policy change in a government, in a society, in a nation, through his inspiring, influential rhetoric. So that's his South Node, that's his moon, that's his Saturn, that's that Pluto, Gemini, 8th house. When you think of Chiron in relation to all of that, it's an underlying sense of our condition as a German people. Remember, Cancer's identity. Capricorn is the society you live in, the culture, the boundaries, the border, the nation itself, and Cancer is your identification with that nation. It's your identification as a German, whereas Germany would be Capricorn. So your identification as belonging to a certain race, white race, Aryan race, a certain culture, certain people. And so here we need to create policy and rules that will further strengthen the boundaries, the borders, the rules, the glory, the importance, Saturn, Leo, 10th house, of this unique Aryan white race of people. And Pluto, Neptune in the 9th house, mass annihilation, murdering of Jews and minority people, those who didn't fit the box of that particular culture. So the otherwise soft and gentle and loving and nurturing Cancer energy, which is, I want to feel safe in my womb here. I want to feel safe in my identity and who I am. Here it's, I feel vulnerable. I feel vulnerable that the Jews are da-da-da-da, and all the scapegoat creations that he created. I feel vulnerable, and that related to the masses where they felt economically and socially vulnerable, projected the cause of their vulnerability as outside of themselves. And so that vulnerable Cancer dynamic here manifesting as this very extreme manifestation of dictatorship to annihilate and execute millions of people in order to create the kind of nation that was safe for that particular race of people, Cancer in the 9th house. And so that Chiron here is creating wounds of racial, religious, social vulnerability, insecurity, and non-belonging for millions and millions of people. Not even, and Chiron doesn't speak to that signature alone, doesn't speak to the murdering and the killing, but in context, we understand that this is a part of the story of creating a massive dynamic of alienation, not belonging. Export, you don't belong here, you're not a part of this. And so with a soul that is associated, that is merged with the evil archetype of creation, when we find Chiron on the North Node, this is not a soul that's going to bring forth new medicine, birth a new medicine, because Chiron on the North Node for most other souls, especially if they're, you know, really doing their work, can be a soul that brings forth medicine into this world, something new. You know, Adam Gainsbourg, which wrote a book on Chiron, has Chiron on his north node. But otherwise, Chiron on the north node for an evil dude can be bringing forth a big wide green light to wound, to create wounding, to affect pain in this world. So that's my thing on Hitler.
I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but didn't his mom dress him up as a girl or something?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know about that. I know that he wanted to go to art school, and he was angry at his father for not
Right.
doing that.
I know that he said one of his fondest childhood memories was sleeping alone with his mother in the big bed while the father was away at work. Yeah, and I think as well we can see this that, well, in an article that I had read that it says for most of his life Hitler was predominantly homosexual,
Oh, interesting.
and that in his teens and early 20s he had a string of exclusive male companions. And I didn't know about that.
I did not know about that either. That makes a lot of sense, though.
Mm-hmm. But just in terms of the gender, all that gender energy in his chart,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, and then of course, yeah, I mean that being a total taboo and culturally unacceptable, and the
Right.
need to then become completely against.
Exactly.
Okay,
All right.
let's look at this
Let's
chart.
we'll
Walt
go to
Disney.
Walt Disney. Quite a swing in the other direction.
So I want to read an excerpt here from Wikipedia. Disney's public persona was very different from his actual personality. Playwright Robert E. Sherwood described him as almost painfully shy, diffident, and self-deprecating. According to his biographer, Schickler, Disney hid his shy and insecure personality behind his public identity. Kimball argues that Disney played the role of a bashful tycoon who was embarrassed in public and knew that he was doing so. Disney acknowledged that the facade and told a friend that I'm not Walt Disney. I do a lot of things Walt Disney would not do. Walt Disney does not smoke. I smoke. Walt Disney does not drink. I drink. Meaning his persona externally was very different than how he actually lived. Critic Ferguson called the private Disney common and everyday, not inaccessible, not in a foreign language, not suppressed or sponsored or anything, just Disney. Many of those with whom Disney worked commented that he gave his staff little encouragement due to his exceptionally high expectations. Norman recalls that when Disney said, "That'll work," it was an indication of high praise. Instead of direct approval, Disney gave high-performing staff financial bonuses or recommended certain individuals to others, expecting that his praise would be passed on. Great. So here we have Chiron conjunct Mars, conjunct Saturn, conjunct Jupiter in Capricorn in the fourth house. And this fits really well to this like almost like incredibly self-deprecating and harsh and disciplined attitude he had in trying to succeed, trying to get there. And it's opposite Neptune in Cancer in the 10th house. That Neptune in the 10th house is a creation of Disney World, right? It's like this fantasy world that actually had a whole effect on the entire world, on the entire nation. And it nurtured the collective, became a symbol for, you know, children in an entire, completely into a different world. He even wanted he created Epcot in Disney World. He actually intended it to be like an alternative community, this vision that he had for it. So we see here, I think a big part of an insight into his own nature with this Neptune opposite Chiron in the 4th, 10th house axis is his own deep sense of wanting something more meaningful, wanting deeper nourishment, deeper care, something that he can really rest into. And so his soul manifested this through the creation of his art project and through the success of his business. But the emphasis here of his, public persona being very different than his actual personality is significant here, because he was a chain smoker. He was harsh. He worked so hard. He was deeply driven. So we see a lot of repressed emotion, and then he accessed that through his work and through, the fantasy world that he created.
Right. And so the creative process and all of what he created that was able to create, ignite and create a feeling within him, right? It was allowing himself to feel something that wasn't real, right? It was kind of creating something outside of himself.
Yeah.
To try and, to avoid what he's got to deal with within himself.
And yet there's medicine. So like the vulnerability, it's like he was able to create these archetypes like Mickey Mouse.
Right.
He was able to access this innocence, and I would say the Capricorn in the fourth, like these repressed parts of his own emotional body, perhaps of his childhood. He was able to access something that he actually didn't know how to access through his work. And so it's through his work, through his vision, through the discipline art that he created, he was actually able to produce some kind of medicine that reflects some level of vulnerability that he was, embodying, that became medicine. And I mean, I have friends that are just obsessed with Disney. Like the whole Disney universe that he created is just full of fantasy and dreams and possibilities and romance. It's just very beautiful, patriarchal for sure, but beautiful fantasy world of possibilities that can bring a lot of hope to people when this world isn't doing it so well.
Yeah, it's giving him a break from reality. And you can see here too, the ruler of his south node in Taurus in the 8th is Venus in Capricorn in the 5th. It's like the only relationships that he has with people are those that he created and put on stage, right?
Yeah.
In the 5th house.
Yeah.
He just put him on stage, and that's, obviously he had relationships in his world, but it was like all this professional kind of hardcore, high expectations, high bar, not a lot of praise, and yet all of his love went to these characters that he created and put on stage. That was his world of relationships, I'm sure.
Yep. It's interesting to see that there's a Libra moon also, squaring the Cancer Capricorn. So that really adds a lot more to the vulnerability. There's actually a really deep need for the soul to have the experience of being accepted and loved and appreciated and, wanted just as he is. So there'd be a lot of vulnerability in that regard.
Look at him. He's a Sagittarius.
Yeah, look at that. One of us.
Yeah, you're the 3rd, I'm the 4th, he's the 5th. Boom, boom, boom.
Right on.
Oh no, you're the
I'm the 3rd. I'm the 3rd, yeah.
So one thing I was thinking about, because oftentimes with Capricorn, that it can be kind of a late blooming energy. So I'm wondering if later in his life, closer to when he was, I don't know when he passed away. Do you know how old he was?
He was like 65 or something like that.
Oh, that's young.
Pretty young.
I'm just wondering as he got later.
From lung cancer.
Oh, from smoking. Wow.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if later in his life, look at that Uranus Pluto opposition, that's lungs, right? So if he softened it all as he was sort of on his way out, but that's what dying will do to you. Sometimes it takes till then to melt away that.
I wonder at that as well. Yeah, especially that he died in the 60s. Yeah, I'm very curious about that myself, actually.
All right, that was a great example.
Here's a really nice example. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So she has Chiron in Cancer in the 7th house, conjunct Jupiter, opposite the stellium of Capricorn in the 1st, squaring Mars, Juno, and the Sun in Libra in the 10th. So I want to highlight one facet of what this points to here, without getting too intimate with her personal life.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Did you want to say something?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So Chiron in Cancer here manifesting in the 7th house is a deep sensitivity to the energy of acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
caring, respect. She talks about a lot how when she has conversations with people, that she always keeps the door open for them to find a way out. So she's never trying to confront people with, you're wrong, your view is wrong. She's genuinely listening and always speaking from her point of view. She's the only politician I know that practices something that's akin to nonviolent communication. She is incredibly aware and conscious of communication,
Mm-hmm.
how to meet with people that don't agree. 7th house corresponds to all that is not us. Traditionally, 7th house is a house of enemies, right? But what does that mean? It's like different perspectives, different ways of life, that which is not me. You have a different view, different orientation, different reality. And so a lot of what she does is she speaks up for the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
She is speaking up for those that need the most care. And because Cancer is in touch of that within herself, her own belonging, having Puerto Rican roots, and even seeing how the people of Puerto Rico were neglected during the recent hurricane. She knows what it's like. Jupiter conjunct Chiron, Jupiter being race, culture, where you come from. In Cancer, in the 7th, she knows what it's like to be a minority, to be disregarded, to be less than. And so all of this stuff, it squares Libra in the 10th house, social justice. Mars, Libra, defending. And of course, 10th house, becoming a congresswoman and fighting for what is right in this country. So this Cancer really speaks to her own connection to her vulnerability. And you can really see that, like when you see her interviews, you can feel that Chiron in Cancer. It's really beautiful. And yeah, she has a moon in Aries. She's fierce. She can speak strongly. But there's also a very strong connection to her own direct experience of what it's like to be different, to not be accepted as she is. And of course, a very direct manifestation here is she's in Congress. She's different than everyone else, both racially, socially, and politically. And she is the target of immense attack and criticism. And Jupiter, Chiron, the 7th house can be the wounding of not being understood, being misperceived, being projected upon. And so experiencing what it's like to be very different. And yet she's a voice for everyone else as well. So that's one little, yeah.
Yeah, I love, you can see here too, she's got the ruler of that Chiron in Cancer is the moon in Aries in the 3rd, trining Venus and Sag in the 12th. So she's just so outspoken. She speaks, right to what these, and very Venus and Sag, right? Other cultures need and can feel what they need. And you talked about her ability to listen as she's speaking.
Yep.
And I just love how she takes on that Aries moon. She'll go toe to toe with any man. She's afraid of nobody.
Yeah.
And she's incredibly selective with her words. I feel like she has a way of holding the mirror up while she's talking. Just recently, she was, in Congress with because the Republican colleagues were criticizing the Green New Deal resolution without appearing to have read the document. And she said, well, I'm flattered that the ranking member and many members across the aisle seem to be enamored with a non-binding resolution presented by a freshman congresswoman sworn in 3 months ago. I think that ironically, despite that fixation, it doesn't seem that they've actually read the contents of the proposed and presented resolution. We don't need cliff notes for a 14-page resolution that was designed to be read in plain English by the American people. So I would encourage my colleagues to actually read the resolution presented so they can speak to it responsibly and respectfully.
Ah, beautiful. She's inviting respect and integrity here. I love it. I love it.
My favorite is when she says, because you talk all this Capricorn energy with all these examples today. There's so much Capricorn on the other side.
Yeah.
She says it's not responsible to complain about anything that we dislike and call it socialism. when many of our colleagues across the aisle are more than happy to support millions and potentially billions in government subsidies for the fossil fuel industry.
Mm.
It's not so responsible. And so it's true. It's like anytime she says anything, they call her a socialist and they just like throw her under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just, what is she, 28, 29 years old? She's not even 30 yet, I don't think.
29, yeah.
Anyway, she is definitely wounded from all the injustice. That's a Libran archetype, energy, injustice, whatever's, the unfairness, the male-female dynamic, different culture, different race, different gender. She's lived it in spades.
One thing she's spoken about is she says that she feels that her time at Standing Rock, North Dakota, which for those who don't remember, Standing Rock was a very powerful time where before the oil industry eventually got the green light to build a pipeline through sacred land, through water, which has in fact leaked several times already, which they knew it would. That's what happens to pipelines. She was there with a large group of protesters for a long time in the snow, in the cold, to defend and protect and be allies to the native people and to the native land, and people from all over came. And she spoke of that time as a spiritual awakening, but it was all about justice and being there for those that really needed that. And I just love that her own, real spiritual political awakening, and where she became sort of more recognized by the Justice Democrats that sought her out to run for Congress, was really during this time at Standing Rock, where she was politically involved prior, but this was a really powerful time for her where it became real.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like she says, it was only a year ago, she was a waitress serving tacos in a restaurant. All right, a year ago. And she still has that, you talked earlier, I'm glad you brought this up about this Cancer archetype having a shy quality. Of course, she's not shy. She's got that Aries moon to help boost her, make her bold. But it is about the belly. It's about feeding people. And that was her job. It's about making people feel good with all the Libra. And she does it through the belly, serving these tacos in the rest as a waitress to try and make ends meet.
Just to provide a contrast with Hitler, but it's also Cancer. It's like, what is he feeding, right? He's feeding with a philosophy. Like, it's like a belief system that is nurturing to a very specific race of people.
And then Walt Disney's feeding a fantasy.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. And a business,
feeding a philosophy.
Fitting a multi-million, billion, whatever corporation. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that part was not a fantasy. He was
No, he was good at that.
He was making that real, making the money real. He definitely knew how to make that happen.
He dialed that one in big time.
You can see that in his chart too, with all that Capricorn stuff, trining in 8th house, South Node in Taurus. That's money right there, and that Venus ruling trining is ascendant. That Virgo rising was the self-critical, but critical of others part of him too.
Oh yeah,
nothing was ever good enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, this was a little powerful trinity here of so dramatically different. Of course, this is an example of how you cannot take one signature in one chart and make it mean one thing. I mean, we really already just scratched the surface of Chiron and Cancer, the 4th house, and we talked about so many different dynamics and ways that this is expressed and felt. So again, it's important not to single out one symbol without seeing the paradigm and working through it and then weaving it in that story. Because one size does not fit all, right?
Indeed.
So any last thoughts on Chiron and Cancer for those who are sitting there with that signature before we go?
If you're sitting there with that signature, I have nothing to say other than what has been spoken. Nothing else is there.
Okay. What I will say then is to don't be afraid to feel what you've allowed yourself to hide from or run from. Don't be afraid of the vulnerability, understanding that when you can get all the way under what is creating that feeling of perhaps fear or weakness or vulnerability, when you can get underneath it, you'll be able to experience more strength and self-security, I would say, than you ever have in your entire life. I mean,
Beautiful.
dealing with the Chiron in your chart, it's like it will allow the Pluto polarity to come to play. It will be able to, it will allow you to empower yourself more fully and completely without the burr in the saddle, still, creating that rub. So to go into the wound, or to go into the fear, to go into that vulnerability, knowing if you do, and if you do it all the way, that you'll come out far stronger and more self-reliant and whole than you've ever been in your life. So move into the water. That's all.
And I'll say too, to also appreciate that there is a gift that you may have to offer to others as well. Even if we feel so broken and lost within our own selves emotionally, there is, just through that as well, there's, in Asian culture, there's an art, if a pot breaks, like a teapot or a cooking pot breaks, it's glued back together with, often like with gold, different embroideries that go into putting the pot together. And so it doesn't look the same as it did before it broke, but now it's been re-pieced together, and you can tell where the cracks were, but there are these gold pieces in it. Like there's something that is now unique to it that didn't otherwise exist had it not been honored for the precious vessel that it is. So it's like in facing our sense of brokenness, we can become like a clay pot that has been broken and then put together with gold pieces. And there's nothing else in the world like that pot. And yeah.
The teaching of that, it's called Kuntakuri.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, and it's and the message is that the pot and the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. And so the soul, as you put the pieces of your soul back together with gold, and you can use emotion, or think of emotion as gold. As you grow your emotion, it becomes gray, becomes gold. The pain, it turns into something that is shimmering. It's alive. It's like a light inside of you. Yes, you are more beautiful for having been broken because you've been repaired with gold. And I think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I feel like when she speaks and when she is a part of something, what she tells the people that she is speaking for is, I know how you feel. And that's why they trust her, because they know that she knows how they feel. And you can and from their standpoint, you can really only trust somebody that has been there.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ari. This was awesome as always. I love this series so much. And again, I want to just encourage everybody, even if you don't have Chiron in Cancer, you've got planets in fourth, planets in Cancer, you know what we're talking about. You know how it feels. And so this is your opportunity to get into the river and find your way back to the sea. All right, well, I will be here next week, actually, in the next 10 days, again, on Guiding Stars with David Green, as we continue to move through Finding Your Voice series, looking at the phases, or the phasal relationship between Jupiter and Mercury.
Oh, cool.
First phase is next, and we look forward to that one. And so thank you again, Ari, for today. We will be back in about a month looking at Chiron in Leo or Chiron in the 5th house. Ari and I will be back again in May. Until next time, namaste.